The
So,
famous life,
let-
yes, please.
we are a little bit late. Hello, everyone, and sorry for this little delay. The topic today is the silent push out. And with me here today is my colleague, Dr. Nina Murci. And I'm very, very happy that you are here tonight, Nina.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Petra, for the invite. I'm very excited to talk to you about this very important topic of age diversity, and I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I have to explain that Nina and we never met in real life.
Mhm.
But we know each other for long because we were both nominated and also awarded, I think it was 2022, as European Women of Legal Tech.
I think it was even earlier, Petra.
It was the German one. The German one was 2020, I think, and the European one
Yeah.
2022.
Yes. Yeah.
However, before we start into this whole topic, we would like to give you some, let's say, some ideas, some food for thoughts, because I think it is important that you know what we are talking about. The topic is the silent push out, gendered ageism in HR. So, fact is that average age of HR professionals, they are young. They are 25 to 40. And younger recruiters often favor their own age group. And honestly, we all do that. Only 24% of HR professionals aged 25 to 30 are motivated to really hire women 55 plus. And of course, there's a difference if the HR recruiter is older, then this percentage changed. So what I think is, I would love to start with this topic, and I would like to hand over before I'm going to show other slides later during this session. I would like to hand over to Nina, and also what I would like to do, I would like to encourage you to ask questions in the chat, and we are really happy to answer them. Nina, I would say you start.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Petra. It's absolutely true regarding the HR professionals. As you know, I studied law in Germany, I studied law in the US, got my MBA in the US, got my DBA, the Doctor of Business Administration, right in the midst of COVID at the age of 49, because I thought, this is my time now. My kids are grown ups, I helped them to college, they're working, now it's my time again. And my thesis, Petra, was in female and cultural diversity in leadership. So leadership as a big tent and more diversified into the diversity topics. I had an interview with a company because I wanted to go into leadership coaching and people management. And I never told you this story. But the HR professional was around my kid's age, or maybe a couple of years even younger. She was very polite, very pleased. Everything was great. Then I was supposed to have the next interview. The interviewer, she was half my age. She wanted to, and no disrespect, you don't have to have a specific age to know about leadership, but you need to have skills to interview people. And I think if I look back into my younger years, all the mistakes I've done as an evolving leader, you only learn with experience. This young woman did everything you could name, which was wrong in that interview process, just as a backstory to that. Um, I agree with you that specific age groups get along better. However, that said, I think, quite honestly, when you have different people, different genders to begin with, but also different age groups. In one of my previous employers, I helped a young gentleman who was younger than my kids. We became best friends. I was his mentor. And as long as HR professionals don't see the added benefit we, with our experience, bring to the table, instead of looking at us as a competitor or as a threat, we're always going to be slowly but surely pushed out. Oh, they're too old. They don't know how to deal with X, Y, and Z. They don't know what to do with TikTok. I don't need to. But at least our generation, we knows how to write a proper letter and where to set the date. I always come back with that sentence if they ask me about too many social media aspects. So no, I still belong to the age group who knows how to send a letter, where to get envelopes, and where to put the stamp. I still had to balance my checkbook. So these are the aspects. You always have to bring counter arguments.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're totally right. I just see, for some funny reason, we are live on StreamYard, but not live on LinkedIn. However, Nina, I think is we just go ahead,
Sure.
and whatever happens, we either stream it later on, because you also see there is no one participating. But I think we go ahead. And I
Sure,
think
absolutely.
you are totally right. You are totally right. It is kind of, also the set of the perspective. And I think is what happens is, and you mentioned that earlier, I think that's really important, is that as a woman, you never have the right age.
No.
If you're in your early 20s, you're not experienced. You just get a kind of a temp job. If you're then in your 30s, you have the problem, oh yeah, she can get pregnant, she will have kids, etc., etc. In the 40s, it's already, yeah, she might look for their parents or she has some other duties. And then 50s, the game is over anyway.
Yeah,
So,
that's what we discussed yesterday, because I see so many young women, Petra, who are writing on particularly LinkedIn that they are in their 30s, they didn't get a job, versus a man who was not as qualified, because
yeah,
God forbid they might get pregnant and then they have motherhood. Why are you working? So where's the baby daddy? He's providing, but you need to stay home. And then exactly what you said, in the 40s, it's the parents. In the 50s, what are you actually doing? And then 55 plus, why are you even still alive? And
yeah,
they don't understand that actually, I don't know, I assume you feel the same way. I'm 55. I turned 55 2 months ago, and I would not want to be 28 again. I would not want to be 30 again. I'm so much more pleased with myself now than I was back then. Sure enough, you might be younger, you have the beauty of youth, you have certain aspects where you still have this extreme fire and passion in your eyes, but later on, you've seen so much that it's easier to be skeptical about things. You are not naive anymore, but I wouldn't want to exchange it. I'm
yeah.
much happier now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What I would like to have the ideal case would be younger with your experience you have today. That
Well,
I think
well,
would be wonderful. But
yeah.
I also, what I'm just thinking, I just also want to share one or two slides, and um, I just shared already this one where I think it's really important about what really happens in HR, and also the biases. And that
Mhm.
I think is really also very, very important for all of us. We are too expensive, and salary structure not flexible. It always, people always say, well, she's unwilling to learn, and not a cultural fit for a young team, family obligations, etc.,
Mhm.
etc., not digitally fit. And this is, of course, always in the heads. And I'm going to tell my story later. I want to show one more slide here, is that all big companies use applicant tracking systems,
Mhm.
and they, of course, immediately see your date of birth, and that you very, very
Yeah.
often will be automatically filtered out.
Yeah.
And that is a really, really big issue, and whether you like it or not, but that's the reality. And
Absolutely.
I would like to share my, just like, kind of my story, and just
Mhm.
like, and I think it's comparable to a lot of other women. It's kind of this, I call it the wake up call. First, because I didn't know that I was made redundant, because I was basically mobbed out of my job, but that's another story. So first reaction, of course, is total shock. And then you tell yourself, okay, it's fine. I'm going to have a new job. And then, of course, I have a package and I have some time to breathe, because I had something like nearly a year or so. And then, of course, I started applying for jobs. But even that, because I hadn't applied very often, because I always had a job. And that already was kind of different to the time, because that it's working so fast. And what happens then is, and that was even before this whole digitalization, is you send your CV and you apply for the job and there's no response. And then you finally get an interview. And then you face the reality, because you're sitting next to recruiters or people who are much younger than you are. And really, you really feel this age discrimination. It's painful. And I think I did this once or twice. And then I realized, no, I am not made for that. And I am not going to this interview process again. And this was basically for me the core, when I said, you know what, I am not doing this any longer. I start my own business. And maybe you can answer also what happened to you.
Yeah, I've been made redundant twice in my life. It was one time, it was in the US. I was much younger. We were expecting it. And both times, I actually knew that this is going to happen. You sense it when the business is not going well. There was no incoming project work in legal technology. There was nothing coming in. Back then, I applied. It was 12 years ago. I applied, and then I was at a spot in my life, in my private life, that I could decide whether I wanted to stay in the US or leave the US. I had been there for almost 24 years. So I decided to move back to Europe. As a matter of fact, I moved to Switzerland at that time. Now, this time, my personal circumstances are slightly different. I would not be opposed to a move, but I'm much more picky and choosy to where I'm going to move. Regardless of that, going back to the shock factor. So mine was, I was not shocked. I knew their business is not going anywhere. Any strategic decisions from leadership are going towards, no, everybody has to do only their job. If you wanted to do cross-functional help out in the sales process or anything, you were not allowed to. You were just supposed to be in your silo. But long story short, the rest was similar to yours. I was not nervous at all because I thought, all right, I'll get a severance package. I have 3-month time. I'm definitely after 2 months. I've never had issues finding a job. It's going to be so easy. Needless to say, one of the big 4 companies, I've worked at 2 big 4 companies before, like consulting businesses. So another one I applied. I thought, all right, this job is tailored to me. This is perfect. And I was shocked that after, I would say, I applied at 10 o'clock at night. I sent the send button the next morning at 6 o'clock. I got already a decline. I thought, okay, this can't be it. There is no HR person awake between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. And even if you tailor your response and say something nice and say, okay, we can't accept your application. I did it again with the same position after 2 months, the same thing again. After 6 to 8 hours, I got a no. And then I realized my CV has my Abitur, my diploma, like my high school degree year on it. So you can easily calculate how old I am. And I think that's exactly what you mentioned. People are filtered out. They're not giving any response. That's typical American. We've always had it. If you don't get a response within 2 to 3 weeks, forget about it. It's definitely a no. They get so many applications that apparently they don't have the time to reply. Whether or not that's rude, that's a different topic. But in general, I find also the interview process on some level easier, but on some levels more interesting. There is automatically the German do from the very beginning. People are spoken to with their first names, they ask, is it okay if I call you Nina? For me, I think way too American. It's always okay. But the entire interview process has changed. And you had in one of the previous slides, Petra, you had something regarding the remuneration, that our salaries are much more expensive. I've had so many experiences with that, that I was asked whether or not I was willing to go lower with my salary. My response is usually, I really like your position, but would you ask the same question? Would you ask the guy the same question? And I said it once to an HR professional. I said, okay, I have that experience. I have these strengths I bring to the table. You want me to accept a lower position, go lower with my salary, and then I'm going to be sitting there reporting to a 35, 40-year-old man who doesn't have all my language skills, who doesn't have all my experience, who doesn't have my academic background. Why would I accept this? Why would I accept this? And I think I'm seeing more and more women going into that direction you went, opening up their own businesses, finding their own businesses, because that's where we can apply our strength. And then we are being taken seriously again. It's terrible to calculate, okay, these people are 50 or 55, they work another 12 years, they're going to leave us. They want people who are 25 with 30 years of experience and who are willing to work for 40,000 euros. That's not going to happen. That's never going to happen. You know? And it's really a dilemma right now in the German market, or in DACH region, or maybe even globally.
Yeah, I think it's the very good point you made. It's like, would you ask this question a man? Surely not. You wouldn't. And I think is what happens is, and I see it's even getting worse, because what happens is you will be made redundant at a certain age. And as a woman, you just always have to justify whether you have kids or no kids, whether you're working or not working, whether so you always have to justify whether you work part-time or full-time, etc., etc. This is a big problem. And what I see actually, which I think is also another really big problem, is that a lot of women, they are ashamed of the situation. It's a shame about the shame. And I think this is something else, which is also, I think, extremely important to mention here, is like, well, no, it's not your fault if you're made redundant, but in our society, it feels like you have done something wrong.
Yeah.
And it feels like, and I was approached by a lot of women last September, last autumn and winter and spring. And this is why I had the idea to just like do a recording. Obviously, we're recording it, but it's not streaming, but that's another issue. And I think they all had the same, they all highly qualified, and they all came to realize, well, we are going to have a problem here because we won't get, they come to realize we won't get a normal job. Either we downsize them on the salary side, or we could just start with something totally new. And then the problem is that the majority of them basically have always worked in a corporate environment. So their network is then also kind of in danger, because if you are made redundant, your colleagues will be also made redundant. So this network you have established, they are all kind of in the same situation. And what you see is, and that it takes a long time, and then you have to accept another a decrease in salary or other decreases, but you will more or less not have the same position. I also see this already at the moment. That's another issue, but it also affects women. It's like a lot of women are working in the NGO sector, for example, and they are, let's say, very career women in their 30s, 40s, so let's say in their 40s. And that a lot of them have been made redundant because of basically the US. They are just like withdrawing their payings to these big organizations. And now you are applying for a job, and you're applying with 1,000 others, and the situation is also, it's much more stressful. That's another topic. But again, I see that there also women won't get the job, because in NGOs you very often have to go into the fields. You have to be,
Yeah.
you have to prepare to go to even to kind of a dangerous regions, etc., etc. And
Yeah.
the majority of employers, they think, well, women are not so good. We should prefer men, and I think is that's another issue. What I also think is, what I believe is, what the problem is, that I'm going to show. I want to show the slides again. That we are missing out in companies. We have a lot of, so we do have a lot of where women really getting kicked out. They will no longer be on the cool projects,
Mm.
and they will be removed from leadership roles. And these are examples of exclusions, and that
Mm.
starts on a very low level. And what I think is one of the biggest problems is really the brain drain. And because also the costs, because we are getting rid of people who really have the experience and who
Yeah.
cannot be substituted by AI. And then on the other hand, you have the young people, they don't get a job because we do have the AI. But I think in this case, the brain drain, the cost, the actual cost of that I think is also another very important topic here.
Mhm. Mhm. Going back to your previous slide, Petra, that women are being pushed out of leadership positions or from key projects, I think that's not necessarily age specific. Again, at one of the big fours, I realized that they had the brotherhoods, anything of social contact after work, the boys would be hanging out, or the cool projects were giving to the guys. If you asked one of the guys to cover for you during your vacation, you had to be careful that you actually get your project back. And it happened to me once where I thought I've been doing a mentorship to a young gentleman. I told him, I'll help you to come to the next level. Long story short, I went on vacation. I said, okay, you know what? You show senior leadership that you can cover for me during that time period. And when I come back, I'll help you to climb up the ladder. Needless to say, he became friends with another person who was above me. So he jumped over my head. And when I came back, the gentleman above me said, okay, you know what? I don't actually need you on this project. Needless to say that I had done everything before I left. Yeah, he's doing a great job. It's going to be his project from now on. Where I exploded, I said, no, that's not how it works. I've been doing all the job. So it wasn't necessarily an age thing. It was more, in that case, it was a nationality, and it was the boys' club, where I would always say the boys' club. I've had experiences where really sexist jokes were said in front of me, where I was completely new in the company, and I pretended I didn't hear it, and I just asked for a repetition. The gentleman blushed, and he said, no, nothing. I said, listen, I heard what you said, and I heard it, and your colleague heard it. But for everybody's sake, do not repeat that anymore, and definitely not in front of a young woman, because she's not going to corner you like I do. But again, I ruined my entire career at that company because I was constantly pushed out of his meetings or anything, just because I was willing to stand up for all the women. But I think that's something gender specific again, and not necessarily age. A young woman in that case, she would have probably laughed about it, felt embarrassed, would have felt that she needs to give in to his comments, regardless of her own comfort. Versus age-wise, I did not care. I lived the majority of my life in the US. If you make one of these comments, you're fired. And in Europe, it wasn't necessarily the case. But I think going back to one of our first statements, it's a tough position for women generally in the corporate world, regardless of age. But the older we get, the more difficult it becomes, simply because people are more scared of us, because they know we will speak up. We've seen it all. We will speak up. And I think that's one of the major issues, in
Mhm.
quotation marks,
Yeah,
issues.
I think that's a very good point you mentioned. We first of all we will speak up, and I think it's also very important. You mentioned something else is like because there are so few women in these top positions that we don't have that network. So the boys, they always have this. The boys just like if they look around, there's always some C-level guy next corner, and they can just like they can start becoming friends with them. I honestly have to say, I had even people who started smoking because the boss was smoking. They started smoking
I believe you.
to have these smoker rests where they were standing in an atrium and were smoking, and they were just like talking about the next deals. And I think this is something where I do believe that's another big problem. And I wouldn't say necessarily say when women always say, well, it's a bitch. No, it's not a bitch stuff. It's like there are if you're 10 women at the same age, there might be some bitchy situation. But if you have 5 women at the age of, let's say, 30, another 5 35, another 5 44, then you can build up this kind of network where which is always very, very helpful. We don't have that. So the one thing is just a gender thing without the age component. On the other hand, it's the age. And I personally do feel you see it, wherever you look at, whether you look, for example, at if you have a political guy, if it is a woman, whatever she does is always worse than what the man does, etc., etc. And
Oh,
she
yes, I've seen that as
and
well. Yeah.
I think is what you also see that there's a company, let's say the whole bashing, mobbing internet, etc., etc. These are always the women,
Mhm.
and what you see is like a company like the big company in Germany, Hate that helps victims from internet crime. They have minorities and women,
Mm,
and women who are exposed. And
mm.
if you're in a company, if you're exposed, if you stand up, then people normally will not like you, just like due to the fact you do that.
It's true.
And that I think is also very, very important
Yeah,
stuff.
that's true. That's true. And I agree with you. Unfortunately, a lot of women who climb up that ladder, they become so hard and so
Yeah,
so much in their box. They have tried so much to be one of the boys. And I've
yeah,
seen that. I've seen
yeah,
one of the partners at one of the companies I worked for become so harsh, and then trying to impress the partner who I was working for, instead of embracing that a younger woman is working for her and saying, okay, Nina, I'll help you climb up the next step. Or I was very young at that time, but they become very much, I had to fight for my position. Why should I help another woman? Then there is a
yeah,
younger version of me at the table. Why
yeah,
would I do that? I strongly believe in sustainable leadership, Petra. I think if I fought for the seat at the table, there is one female sitting at the table. So I will make sure that when it's my time to get up, that I can fill that seat with the next woman and not leave the seat empty, because then the boys are going to fill it up with one of their bodies. Then we have another situation again. Then another woman has to fight for her seat. So training another woman to say, okay, I will eventually leave, but we want to make sure you're trained enough that you can take this seat over. And hopefully by then we will have two seats at the table, you know? I've seen that in corporations, in law firms, at volunteer positions. These women groups sometimes are very harsh with each other, very, very harsh, because they want to get one of them starts and wants to get to the top. And I think as long as we women don't support each other and don't embrace each other's differences and strength, and are not willing to say about another woman, she looks very pretty, she is very smart, she is better in X, Y, and Z than I am, but I'm better in ABC. If we are not willing to be objective, we're never going to be able to fight against the male world. But
Yeah,
if we constantly fight within us, it's never
yeah,
going to work.
yeah. Yeah, what I think is that's one point. What I see is like I'm coming back to the silent push out. So you're pushed out, whether it is for whatsoever reason. But
Mhm.
what I have seen is one of the issues, whether it is bias or not, it's also that they say, well, they are not digitally fit. This is something where a lot of, and that's all very often driven, of course, by younger and of course again men, and they say women are not digitally fit. And honestly, I really have to admit this is sometimes the case, because a lot of women they either thought it's not necessary to invest
Mhm.
in this topic, or they thought, well, we always have a backup with our IT, I don't need to do this, etc., etc. And that kind of, you really, that comes back now as a problem for those women,
Mhm.
that I have seen very often, and the problem is, I spoke with a woman, for example, she was running digital transformation projects, but she was running it as a project. She was not really running, let's say, the automation processes,
Mhm.
etc., etc. And when she applied for other positions, she of course then was asked by younger people, have you ever done this and this and this? And of course she hasn't, because she was running the
Mhm.
project. And that already was enough to just like kick her out, and just tell, well, she doesn't have the necessary digital skills.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
also an issue. What I see in, when it comes to women and age, what I see, Nina, is what I see is actually, we do have the problem that it's real life, but it's not streaming to LinkedIn.
Mhm.
What I would do is, I would just like stop here,
Mhm.
and I'll try to put it on LinkedIn anyway, and I'm going to give you a call,
Oh,
and I think we should, because we have something like 35 minutes. Normally, would
mhm.
have had a discussion now, and unfortunately, as it is not streaming to LinkedIn, we are just the two of us, and I think we have addressed a lot of these topics.
Yeah.
Nina,
Yes.
thank you very much for being with
Thank
me today.
you. Yeah, it was a
And
pleasure, and hope to see you sometime in real life.
yes, we have to. We
Yeah,
have to. I
absolutely.
wish you a wonderful evening,
Yeah.
and
Thank
I'm
you.
going to give you a call. Bye, Nina.
Perfect. Talk to you later. Bye bye. Bye bye.